François Bigot, Jacques Prévost de la Croix, and Jean Laborde, who were involved with the administration of the French fortress of Louisbourg, may also have been involved in the use of Oak Island as a secret site of privateering, smuggling, and buried treasure. François Bigot was the financial treasurer of Louisbourg during the first siege of 1745. Jacques Prévost became the next financial treasurer, named to the position by Bigot. Jean Laborde was later the agent of the treasurers general. He was Bigot's and Prévost's closest ally and benefited from their association by acquiring offices, government contracts, and managing privateering operations that provided a great deal of wealth for all three men. During the Bigot administration, trade had decreased in Canada because of poor harvests, stagnation in France, and trade increased with the West Indies and the British American colonies, which included molasses. The French foreign minister was very upset at the growth of this foreign trade, but Bigot strongly denied the evidence. Bigot was reprimanded by the minister in 1739 for patching the stonework walls and bastions of the fortress that were never completed and poorly maintained. Depressed by the threat of a British attack and flagrant abuses, the Louisbourg garrison erupted into mutiny in 1744. The mutiny was put down, but British prisoners witnessed the disarray. They reported it once they were freed, and it led to the attack on the fortress by the British. In April 1745, British warships under Commodore Peter Warren, close friend of George Anson, began a blockade of Louisbourg. British colonial troops commanded by William Pepperell landed unopposed at Point Platte, 1 mile west of Louisbourg. The garrison held out for 47 days, but further resistance was futile. On June 26, 1745, the Council of War, which included Bigot, made the unanimous decision to surrender. Throughout the siege, Bigot had ensured fair distribution of provisions. The officers obtained an honorable surrender, and Bigot engineered an advantageous commercial transaction. Merchandise in the storehouse was sold to the British and converted into bills of exchange in London. For this transaction, Bigot received a substantial bonus from the minister, and he also made a personal profit. Bigot, Prévost, and Laborde returned to France. They were involved with the Duc d'Anville de la Rochefoucauld's fleet to retake Louisbourg and wage war in New England. Bigot was in charge of supplying the expedition, in which thousands of sailors died of illness. Prévost and Laborde were serving as treasurer's agents on the voyage. The fleet was plagued with problems, and the expedition was a complete failure. When the fortress of Louisbourg was reacquired by peace treaty, Bigot, Prévost, and Laborde returned to New France with promotions. The three would quickly resume their business activities. A report revealed that Prévost defrauded the French crown at Louisbourg. Funds were requested for unfilled administrative posts, the government was overcharged for services rendered, and supplies were purchased above market value. Contracts were awarded to Jean Laborde and his associates Nicolas Larcher and Antoine Rodriguez, and rigged so they made unusually high profits. Larcher built a house, storehouses, and a large wharf on his property. It was charged that Larcher's wharf and storehouses were used for illegal foreign trade. Larcher opened a sawmill and took over the contract for the supply of barrels of coal to Louisbourg. These projects were supervised by Rodriguez. A 6,000 livres advance by Jean Laborde gave Rodriguez and Associates a 3-year contract for cattle. In 1758, over 16,000 large barrels were mined, but war and blockade prevented shipments to Louisbourg. During the 1758 Second Siege, Prévost consistently advocated that the French fleet remain in the harbor to defend the fortress and the ships not be abandoned to augment the garrison. Prévost persuaded the French military officers to accept the British terms of unconditional surrender. Prevost's conduct was questioned, and it was believed that he, like Bigot, during the first siege, had advocated for surrender for financial reasons. As the king's stores were situated behind one of the points of British attack, Prevost had transported the merchandise to a safer location. When the inventory of French goods was prepared, it was claimed that Prevost failed to mention the items placed elsewhere. This booty became profit for him and his associates. Prevost returned to France to await reassignment. He was ordered to investigate the deficit owed by Laborde on his accounts from Louisbourg. The debt was still unresolved in 1762 when Prevost officially resigned with a pension of 3,000 livres. The Duc de Choiseul ordered his arrest in 1763. Prevost proved his innocence and convinced the Paris Lieutenant General of Police, Antoine de Satin, to ask Choiseul for his release. Prevost was freed, but was not permitted to leave Paris until the following April. Choiseul considered him negligent at Louisbourg and ordered that he never be employed in the Marine Department again. Sartine became his new protector and in 1766 persuaded Choiseul's successor, le Duc de Prezelin, to exonerate Prevost officially from any involvement in the Laborde affair. In 1773, the Parliament of Paris upheld his family's nobility, and he was named a Knight of the Order of St. Louis with a pension of 2,000 livres. After serving for 5 years, Prevost retired with a pension of 16,000 livres. In 1782, he was appointed the king's counselor. Jean Laborde first went to Louisbourg in June 1730 and worked himself up to be the treasurer's agent. Tables of authorized payments drawn up in the ministry in Paris were sent out to the colony each year, and Laborde's job was to pay soldiers, sailors, officers, supply merchants, and others for the crown. He paid in cash when he had it and in promissory notes or bills of exchange drawn on the treasurers general in Paris. These were printed forms duly filled out, as were the receipts he was supposed to keep and to send to the treasurers general with his accounts. Laborde's accounts were several years late because the accounting system required that all transactions of a certain year be completed before the accounts could be drawn up and submitted for review. Nothing prevented Laborde from using royal funds or funds borrowed on the considerable credit of his post in his private business ventures. Laborde invested in the privateer ships Labrador and the Triomphe. The loss of Louisbourg interrupted Laborde's trade, but he was ready to begin again as soon as France recovered the fortress. Laborde added the Hazard, the Grenier, and the Chaumont-Pally to his fleet. Laborde in the years 1755 to 1758 made 165,000 livres in molasses alone. Prevost hired his ships for official dispatches to France. Laborde went into transatlantic shipping and added 2 ships. The Dauphine had a cargo that included wine, brandy, onions, shallots, stockings, pins, and powder. The Victoire went to France with a cargo of dried cod, linseed, pepper, brown sugar, mahogany, and other American produce. The buying and selling of British and French ships and their cargoes made Laborde one of the colony's richest merchants. After the second siege, Laborde was back in France and decided to stay in La Rochelle to settle his accounts. Laborde said he left records and money in a strongbox in Louisbourg and was unable to account for several 100,000 livres of royal funds. It was not found, and in March 1763, Choiseul asked the Atlantic ports to hunt for Laborde, who was suspected of trying to flee to England or New France. Laborde was arrested in Paris and was imprisoned in the Bastille for the next 17 months. Sartine decided that Laborde was trying to cover up debts to the crown by excessive personal spending in Louisbourg. Laborde was presented with a bill for 455,474 livres, the price of his release. Laborde signed over all of his assets to the crown, and although they were worth only 336,104 livres, he was released and lived on a stipend of only 400 livres a year. Bigot was also charged with fraud, fined, and exiled to Switzerland. Was there money and treasure taken from Louisbourg and buried on Oak Island? If so, were the French, the English, or both responsible? Did the privateering by Laborde and Associates involve Oak Island as a hidden wharf and place to hide valuables? Why was the Duc de Choiseul, a knight of the Order of the Holy Spirit, so intent on silencing these men? Were they scapegoats, or were more important people being protected? Could a possible treasure deposit involve the Rochefoucauld family and Bonnie Prince Charlie? Why is there a correlation between some future Oak Island lot owners and them serving at Louisbourg?